So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another partner briefing session. This time we're going to talk about Cluster 7's Discovery and Spider solution. Many of you who know us will know what these products are, but we're going to cover this in some detail, and really with the aim of this session of how you would start a health check. With all these partner briefings, it's more about trying to give you advice and guidance of how you might approach this. It is not per se a product demonstration. It's more about trying to help you position it how you as a partner can take this to market. If you have any questions as we go along, please post them onto the website and we will attempt to answer them during the course of the day. Those of you familiar with our solutions will know that we have really three main capabilities. The ability to discover files, establish an inventory, and compare, monitor, or track changes to those Excel files. What we're doing within this process here is actually looking at that process or from there. So the first one of those things is we would normally set with our clients, and what our clients show us is that they would normally find the inventory first, and what that means in that basis is they would normally start with a policy or a procedure or a process that they want to govern, and then actually discover the files that they want to comply with that process. So traditionally we have done that on premise, but as you will also note, we're also using this using our cloud version as well. So by using the risk check process on Cloud Spreadsheet Manager, CSM, we're able to both risk check and compare the files in that environment. And in essence, that gives a very simple health check option. And it also gives the ability to discover the files and perhaps promote what we're going to cover within the rest of this session is actually talking about discovery. Discovery consists of three capabilities in itself. As you can read here on the screen, a light scan, a deep scan, and a spider diagram. So the light scan is actually a very simple process in that it's really looking at the inventory of all Excel and indeed other file types on the network. It is discovering those files. Via filters, we can look at that inventory and, for example, look at whether we want to find all the files that exist or only those files that have been used in a particular time frame. We can look for file types, really to create a smaller targeted list. And it's really, if you look at this funnel on the right-hand side, it's focusing on that. So without much further to do, we're actually going to go and look at part of this process here. So just bear with me a second. And we're just going to bring this piece up. Of course, the session timed out while I was talking to you, which is always a good demo environment. So what we have here is actually sitting on this screen is a light scan status. And if we wanted to run a new scan, we select this window here. And as you can see, right at the top here, we're able to look at different windows or file shares, or indeed come from a SharePoint site as well. We give the scanner name and a description down here, and indeed we can start applying filters at this early stage, whether it's a minimum size, a maximum size of file, whether we want files modified or changed on a particular area. So I only want to look at files that have been modified since the beginning of 2018, for example, or only files created within a certain period. It helps select various things. Sitting below here are the selected file types. So here we have all the classic Excel file types, and if I wanted to add another file type here, for example, I could just add a JPEG in here and add this into the list, and if I just scroll down a bit further, you'll see I've added that file type in here. Very straightforward. If I want to exclude files from this or include them in a very specific way, I can do this, and using these other options here, actually look at eliminating or removing certain folders like HR or payroll or something like that, because I don't want to pick up those files for a security reason. I can select folders I want to add to this within here, just literally going into my folder manager, and in addition to that, I can remove add a number of folders within this process. So guess what? We're not going to run through that. We're going to pick up one that I picked up earlier, and this is called a light scan. So we'll see within this light scan that we've got 788 files that could be looked at, and indeed were, of which 648 matched the criteria, sitting down the right-hand side over here, and 78 were, 648 were there, 140 were ignored. That meant they didn't meet one of these criteria, so it's probably a file type that's not listed down here in this instance. We'll come on to the consolidation and so forth. So let's go and look at the results of that. And the results are sitting here, and what they're saying to us is that we've actually got a list of files, and we've got a consolidation process going on. So actually, out of these this number, there were, out of the 688, there were 78 that were actually unconsolidated. That means there's a single instance of that file. And 139 have multiple hits, i.e. there's two or more matches, and therefore they're being consolidated into a single file. So 139 versions, single versions of multiple versions, if you will. So that's very useful for us to understand, and really that's what the light scan is doing. And I can apply more filters at this stage, and I can actually start sorting on various aspects here, for example, on last access or last modified, and you'll see that these things will switch around, as the case may be, across my whole data set. So indeed, that is where we are, and we're going to swap back over now to the demo in terms of where we are. So having run that particular light scan, we may want to run a deep scan. Now, deep scan is different in its context. It's not trying to find all file types. It only applies to Excel. What we're doing in this point is we're running a risk check against every file on the target list. And I'll come back shortly to what a risk check is. The aim is to narrow this list down further. We're trying to find high-risk files or high-complexity Excel files that we can use. So again, the idea of using this filter, this funnel, is there. For those not familiar with Cluster 7, what is a risk check? A risk check really is assessing across an Excel workbook. It assesses every cell for a particular rule. Now that rule may be it's looking for a complex formula, for macros, for VBA at a workbook level. At a cell level, it may be looking for white text on a white background because somebody's trying to hide something. We have introduced this concept of magic numbers where people have added 100 to the end of a calculation. That's quite different from something where you have a constant where somebody's perhaps dividing by 12 to get the year. In addition to that, we can find curious things like passwords, credit card numbers, personal data, and very useful in the context of GDPR. So for example, a credit card number we know is a 16-digit number described in a number of formats. And we can find that within the workbook, even on areas such as hidden data sheets and so forth. So a risk check is one of these checks. We combine these checks into a profile, and those profiles the profile is that which the deep scan is run against. Now you can run that deep scan across multiple profiles. So you can run it against poor spreadsheet practice, and you could run it again against the same data set against GDPR. And of course, you will get different results as well. So again, let's see some of that in action, and let's go and see where that is. So we left ourselves here at the light scan results, and we're now going to go across to the deep scan results. And this is a matter of actually going back to the light scan. We start the assessment sitting down here. and it will then result in a deep scan process. So what the deep scan process is running against that profile. So it's taking the question, and again, we can look at this here. So if we were to start an assessment, if we run the deep scan process, we can choose which profile we wish to run this against and how this is run. So you see here that the risk category is high. And if we scroll across a bit further here, we'll see that the profile uses poor spreadsheet practice and the author. But we may also be wanting to look at, for example, links or worksheets or whatever particular issue we have defined in the poor spreadsheet practice that we're looking to get. As you can see, we've got the listing over here as high, but if I were to clear that particular category, you'll see that there's actually a whole selection of results coming in here, which can actually determine what types of results I'm getting and whether I want to review them. So coming back to the high again and setting this way, I may want to look at this particular area, and the reason why is if I come over here, it may be that I'm looking for something that's got a lot of links to it. You'll see this is in a hierarchy of links with 2 or more links at the top. So I might choose to take this spreadsheet and actually add it to my spider selection list and run that as a spider process. And we're going to come on to what that spider is in a second. This is very useful, this particular list. I can add a whole bunch of more properties to that process. And again, I can select and sort and store this as information for later use as to a initial view of my inventory from a complexity perspective, not a materiality perspective, but a complexity perspective. So let's swap back over to the presentation again and actually step on to the next topic, which of course is the spider. Before we do that, here is the risk assessment. So what we've got on the risk assessment here is this result, and as I said, this comes out in a particular report, and actually the report is giving us a hierarchy sitting here. This report can be stored and printed out and shared with clients on a basis, but we're going to do that later on in some better reports that actually helps you as the partner actually start giving recommendations based on this. At the moment, we've just sifted and sorted the files and given them some sort of complexity rating based on their risk profile. So we're going to swap back over to the demo again, and let's go and have a look at the spider process itself. So to start a spider process, we actually sit here and we're going to add another file. When you saw that, we could import that from elsewhere. But as with all good demonstrations, what we're going to do is actually look at some of the things we've run earlier. And we'll see that here's a spider run here. So we'll see that from one file, because clearly there's one file sitting at the top of this, and with one run, we have created a file count of 794. And if I were to click on this, I then end up with this diagram of showing the actual listing of this process. So continuing the story from earlier, so if my file that is interesting is sitting here, I can then actually click on this file, and as you can see, I start getting the metrics of this particular Excel file. So that is of interest to me, and indeed, I may want to isolate that as part of my diagram, so I can do a start it from here. So what this does is actually hides the rest of this diagram and produces the hierarchy associated with that. It's not very friendly, is it, where that looks? So what we can do is we use a different metric, a different design for that diagram, which is called a force. And what this is doing here is rendering this into a different format, a connections tree, if you will. And if we just scale this to the right size, we'll find that, and stop it moving around too much, we will find that we can actually look at this. And now I can actually drill into these red areas here and actually look at further detail. And I could continue to drill down this diagram at any point in time, identify this file, an owner, and actually take action upon this. So I'm using this to isolate where I am on this model and actually decide what I want to do with this. So returning to our presentation, what we have done is, in creating this diagram here, we've created these hotspots or red areas that, as we said, we can drill down on, make recommendations. And actually what we want to do now is capture that information in a report. And I'm going to come on to that report in a short while, so just bear with me a second. So why would we do this? Why do we want to run a health check? I guess it's the question that you need to ask your client, and as you go into this, is what is the purpose of running the health check? Is it to find all the files? Is it to find Excel files? Are you trying to find what termed as EUCs, end user computing files? Are they critical or complex, and are they part of the model? So firstly is determine that piece. It may be useful as part of that process to understand what other workbooks and indeed other data sources are linked to that. And that's where the spider piece comes in. Now, this is done for a particular reason, either because you're trying to compile inventory or you're trying to pull into the inventory that you've established, you're trying to pull in more data and more information, and you're actually using our technology to isolate those that are critical and complex. Some of our largest customers are major banks, and they literally have tens, if not hundreds of millions of Excel files across their network. There's no way that you want to store an inventory of that number and actually manage that inventory. So what we're enabling here as part of this process is actually bringing down the fact that we can find files that have been used recently, that are complex, i.e. they've got a high risk score, and actually it's something that we want to monitor and use and perhaps capture for future attestations. So that is exactly what the health check process does. And typically from a client that has the tens or hundreds of millions of files, that'll reduce down to maybe 100,000 files, or even less, maybe 20,000 files. That sort of order of magnitude of Excel files that are now with their inventory. Still a large number, but actually a lot easier to get your head around and a lot easier to manage compared with the millions. And the great thing is you can run this on a regular basis, so that any new files created in the last 6 or 12 months, and you've seen that from the very beginning of this demonstration, you'll be able to pick up those new files and again look at those and just determine if they got high risk or not. So how long does this take to do? Well, on the assumption that the client has got the server, and we'll come on to this, on the server, and has got an agreement with you to license this for a period of time, it will take a couple of weeks to run with all these processes that described. And normally we would suggest that it runs over a couple of months to pick up all the information we want to do various runs against different profiles, and actually build a fairly comprehensive result. What are we trying to do at the end? We're trying to determine a technically complex file, a technically high risk score, something that we can use and say these are files of interest. Now, from a requirements perspective, it runs on a number of servers, and indeed, if you refer to us afterwards via the partner portal or come back to either Jonathan or myself, you'll actually see the Discovery Spider specification and talk about those sizes. We provide an evaluation or proof of concept agreement to our partners so that they can contract with us to use this. This includes a statement of work, which sets out the term and fees of this agreement, as I said, normally over 2 months. And the fees are set out here below, as you can see, primarily for the services. If you wish to rent the software beyond the initial 2 months, then there's a rental fee of 2K sterling or $3,000 per month for that rental period. Once we've agreed that we're going to go ahead with this, we'll make sure that the environment is correct, and make sure it's at the right specification, very important. And if that is correct, to install the software itself is really a couple of hours to set up. We will undertake a couple of days training as well for the client, and indeed for you as a partner as well. Although we're not aiming to train the partner to install and run this as a standalone process. It's a very important point. One of the key aspects then is that running Discover Inspired is to make sure that the technology can access the required networks drives. Now, we will need the technical support of the folks within the organization to do that, within the client organization, as they need to make sure we've got the right security and the right ability to get to the files and capture the information we need to know. And this sometimes can take a bit of time just to work through the security maze that many organizations have established today for good reasons, to make sure that the data is properly controlled. In running the scan, the scan itself, the light scan is very quick. We'll run in a couple of hours and we'll pick up hundreds of thousands, millions of files. And clearly, the bigger the network, the longer the scan will run. The deep scan is more sensitive, bearing in mind it's now doing a risk check on every cell in every Excel file. So if a particular Excel file has 10,000 cells and it's got 5 rules you're checking, that's 50,000 checks being done. So if you've got a lot of files, that can take some time. The spider in itself, again, is not a long process. It may take half a day, as the case may be, depending on how pervasive that network is. Noting again, it's also still doing a risk check against those Excel sheets, unless that risk check has already been done as part of the scan. As part of the process, the product produces a number of standard reports, and indeed, the information is stored in a SQL database, so it can be extracted in a number of different ways, but we do produce this for you and help you analyze the results. What the aim is in providing this to the partner is that the partner can write the recommendations as to how this can be done. So actually analyzing that particular piece there. So for example, let's have a look at some of the reports. So it may be here, what we're looking at is that it's looking at how many files are in there and what the risk categories are. It may be looking at the key metrics for those files. How many cells, how many of those files have formula cells, how many have error codes. So that's at a sort of a high level. If we come across here, we'll actually see the report itself. So this is the light scan summary. It's telling us what it looked for, so the types of files that it was looking for. It also tells us here what the number of files it searched for and how many consolidated, i.e. how many versions consolidated down. And you can see that this particular one ran in 1 minute, so it just shows how fast it is. And it's telling us in the end it got 120,000 matched, of which 1,125 were non-consolidated across 5,273 folders. So quite a piece of work done. What's sitting here is in the second report, the light scan property, and this is showing us here that we've seen some of the files have failed, potentially because there was no password, for example, but also telling us the sort of information that it's extracting from those files as a count. So whether it's got the author, the company, whether it's got keywords, hyperlinks, last saved by, and things like that. So the properties are also used as part of this process. And sitting on this second page here, we have counts and distinct values are being established. On the deep scan summary, this is a longer report. We're actually picking up here some of the key metrics at the top here, but we're also identifying how, for example, how frequently name ranges are used, how many times these magic numbers, remember these constants, are being added as well. but also significantly workbook links and VBA. So these are now perhaps driving some complexity within those files, and they may be driving some of the issues. We've been setting our rules. We've determined here whether the file has scored high or low, and indeed, if that score is high, has it breached the various thresholds, the categories we've set up within the tool, and they again are identified for further analysis. Coming down to the next page, we're now looking at the number of rule breaks that have been down. So we may be looking at a rounding error for a particular reason, magic numbers. So we see the number of rule breaks across the whole data set and the number of files that have failed that. Again, this starts giving us flags, alerts to what we want to do. What follows is what I call the top 10 lists. We're looking at the top 10 files with formulas in them, the top 10 files with worksheets. So you see this one's got 82 worksheets, quite a high number. Those that actually have macros in them. So you see 9 have VBA, 19 have macros and 9 have VBA references. The number of times they've been how many times an author has been involved. So Sean Kelly has been a proliferate developer of Excel spreadsheets. The VBA references themselves, so the links. So we're seeing that this particular link is being added in 25 times in number of files. So therefore, it's something we probably want to focus on and making sure that that VBA and that link is well managed. The data connections, so how are we connecting on the SQL connections here with the OODB? And we can bring on many more into this. So each of these things are between this, the spider report, and these three reports here. They're all helping us determine how we want to manage this report and how we want to deal with this particular information. That, in summary, is the health check process and Discovery Spider. We have used this extensively to find information across our client networks and helps us find new business, but also helps prove to the client of the issues underlying what they're doing, whether it's model risk governance, whether it seems to be BCBS, whether it's in the insurance industry, or as simple as GDPR. Each of these things are highlighted to the client through this process and actually used to help build their inventory and actually establish a better piece of practice in place. I trust that has been interesting today, and thank you very much one and all for your time.